Now, don't get me wrong. I like South Ealing as much as the next man. Nothing against it at all. Lovely little station. I would absolutely invite it over for tea. But when I mention it to people, one of the most common responses I get is, what's the point of it? I mean, it's practically next to Northfields. What you're watching right now is footage I took while travelling from South Ealing to Northfields to demonstrate how close they are. I've even had people suggest that it shouldn't exist at all and it should be closed down. Well, a lot of people have thought that over the years, including London Underground themselves. So the question arises, why are these two stations so close together? Well, let's wait for the train to come to a complete halt and then we'll have a look into it, shall we? Let's begin at the beginning. These days, South Ealing is on the Piccadilly line, but when it was first built in 1883 it was on the District line. Or rather, the Metropolitan District Railway on its branch to Hounslow. In 1901, the district was bought out by Underground Electric Railways of London, who viewed it as what we'd now call a metro, an urban commuter line with frequent stops. In 1905 they electrified the line through here, and in 1908 they added a new station, a halt known as Northfields and Ealing, to serve new development in the area. By the 1920s, the district's western end had become very complicated. There were lines to Hounslow Barracks, Richmond, Wimbledon, Ealing Broadway, South Harrow, South Acton and Kensington Olympia, all feeding on to the central section, ultimately converging at Earl's Court. This meant that the central section was extremely congested, particularly when it had to share tracks with the Metropolitan Railway on the Circle line. But the individual branches feeding onto it had a poor service. The South Harrow line was particularly poorly served. All of the places where the district terminated were served by other railway companies, so the district risked losing traffic to them if it couldn't provide a decent service. Underground Electric Railways of London, or UERL, came up with a solution. They not only owned the district, but also the Piccadilly Tube, or the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton Railway as it was officially known. The Piccadilly had plenty of spare capacity, so UERL reckoned they could transfer some of the services to it from the district. This would require upgrades to the existing lines, extra tracks and larger stations. This, in turn, would require money, which came from the government in the form of the 1929 Development, Loans and Guarantees Act. This act provided loans on favourable terms for schemes likely to help reduce unemployment. So, game on. The Piccadilly was extended to Northfields. At Northfields, a new depot was needed, which meant that Northfields station would have to be moved. It was rebuilt in a new, larger form on the opposite side of the road bridge. The rebuilt station was now remarkably close to South Ealing. Back then, Northfields had a back entrance on Weymouth Avenue, and to give you some perspective, this is where the Weymouth Avenue exit was. And there's South Ealing. So now the question arose, did they really still need South Ealing? Or rather, did they need South Ealing where it was? Plans were begun to build a new station at Ascot Avenue, about half a mile further east from South Ealing. But before a decision was made, there were other considerations. South Ealing had good interchange with buses, which Ascot Avenue did not. Indeed. Without substantial work to widen the road, it seemed unlikely that there would be space to provide the kind of bus connections that UERL liked. Nor, for that matter, was there space for bus connections on Weymouth Avenue. So, what to do? Build a new station with bad connections, or keep the old one? They spent years mulling it over. In that time, new and exciting stations went up all over the Piccadilly line, the work of architect Charles Holden and his assistants. Meanwhile, South Ealing was rather letting the side down. The old station was knocked down to make way for the extra Piccadilly tracks, but there was only a temporary wooden shelter in place. In 1933, London Transport took over the District and Piccadilly lines, and they began running Piccadilly services through South Ealing in 1935. These services only ran in the off-peak, skipping South Ealing during rush hours. Which seems illogical to me, but that's what this book says. In 1936, a waiting room was added on the eastbound platform, very much in line with the buildings going up elsewhere on the tube. Not that this was a commitment to retain the station. London Transport still hadn't made their minds up. They were still thinking about it when the Second World War broke out. During the war, though, a small event took place that would have a big impact on South Ealing. Namely, the Weymouth Avenue exit at Northfields was closed in 1942. You can see where it was. On Weymouth Avenue there's this bit where someone appears to have added an extra section of wall. And in this very bad footage you can see the concrete structure that supported the walkway to the exit. Anyway, what this meant was that suddenly the effective distance on foot between the two stations became much larger. So South Ealing could stay. Except the war had had a fairly major effect on London Transport. Upgrade works had been paused during the war. In the years following there was little money available, with most of it going on rebuilding and modernising, with the occasional major project. South Ealing just wasn't a priority. In 1964 the district service was withdrawn, but the fact that the station needed to serve the larger district trains explains why there's a step up from the Piccadilly line trains to the platforms today. Still, the station wasn't rebuilt. Decades passed with what should have been only a temporary shelter at the front. Eventually, in 1988, it was decided to do something about it. A new building was constructed in brick, which was a sort of miniaturized version of a Charles Holden station. I rather like it. The westbound platform was given a shelter, which again was a miniaturized version of a Charles Holden design. It's all rather cute. And that's South Ealing today. Is it necessary? Well, clearly TfL think so. The calls for it to be closed aren't very loud. And I would say that these aren't the closest spaced stations on the Underground. They aren't even the closest stations on the Piccadilly line. Looking at you, Leicester Square and Covent Garden. I guess what I'm saying is, why hate on the little guy? Well, I hope you enjoyed this miniaturized tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and subscribe if you have a mind to for more. I would like, as ever, to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon for your ever-generous support. You are the temporary shelter to my demolished station. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.